I'd always thought of myself as a pillar of devotion, a wife who kept the home fires burning, a mother who stitched together the fabric of our family with quiet, unwavering care. My marriage to David wasn't the stuff of romance novels, but it had a solidity I'd come to rely on, a well-trodden path of predictable mornings and hushed evenings. We lived in a modest split-level house on a cul-de-sac just outside Atlanta, the kind of place where the oak trees stretched wide and the summers hummed with cicadas. Our life together was a mosaic of small, steady moments, years spent raising our daughter Lily, weathering the storms of bills and broken appliances, and finding a kind of peace in the ordinary. But somewhere along that journey, the ember that once sparked between us had dwindled into a faint glow, replaced by a comfortable indifference. I told myself this was just what happened when you grew older together, a natural shift from passion to partnership, from wildfire to a slow, dependable warmth. David would sit in his armchair with his coffee-stained crossword puzzles, while I tended to the roses in the backyard, and the space between us filled with the soft drone of routine. Lily had just turned 20, a milestone that seemed to fling open the gates to a new chapter of her life. She was a whirlwind of energy, her laughter a constant melody in our home, and with her newfound freedom came a parade of friends who brought chaos and joy in equal measure. Most Friday nights, our living room and back deck transformed into a bustling hub of young voices, shouts of excitement mingling with the clink of soda cans, and the thump of music spilling from a portable speaker. The air carried the scent of sunscreen and teenage exuberance, and I'd weave through the crowd with trays of chips and dip, a quiet smile on my face. Amid the clamor, I found a strange solace in knowing Lily was happy, surrounded by people who filled her world with light. She'd always been my anchor, the bright thread that held my days together, and seeing her thrive eased the ache of my own unspoken restlessness. Among Lily's circle was a young man named Jake, who stood apart in a way I couldn't quite define. He was 23, with dark hair that fell in a careless wave over his forehead and a presence that seemed to shift the air around him. Tall and lean, he moved with an easy grace, his faded t-shirts and scuffed sneakers somehow adding to his charm. He was unfailingly polite, always a yes ma'am or a quick thank you when I handed him a drink, but there was more to him than manners. He had a quiet magnetism, a kind of understated confidence that drew eyes without demanding them. His smile was warm, disarming, and when he laughed, it was a sound that seemed to ripple through a room, soft yet undeniable. At first, I chalked it up to his youth, to the way 20-somethings carry that invincible glow. But as the weeks passed, I began to notice him more. The way he'd linger after a joke, the way his hazel eyes caught the light, the way he seemed to see things others missed. There was something about him that stirred a flicker in me, a whisper of feelings I'd long ago tucked away beneath the layers of my everyday life. It began on a sweltering Saturday afternoon in July, the kind of day where the heat pressed down like a heavy hand and the sky shimmered with haze. Lily and her friends had taken over the backyard, their shouts and laughter rising above the rhythmic splash of water from the old sprinkler weed dragged out of the garage. I was in the kitchen, the cool tile under my feet a small relief as I sliced watermelon into neat triangles and arranged cookies on a platter. The window above the sink was cracked open, letting in the distant hum of their voices and the occasional burst of a pop song. I was lost in the rhythm of it. Chop, arrange, wipe the counter, when Jake appeared in the doorway, barefoot and dripping wet from the water fight outside. His t-shirt clung to his chest, and a few stray droplets slid down his temple as he flashed that grin of his, too warm, too bright for the dim light of the room. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice smooth and easy. "Need a hand with anything?" I kept my eyes on the knife, slicing through the rind with a little more force than necessary, and muttered a quick, "No thanks, Jake. You should go back out there and enjoy yourself." My tone was brisk, practiced, the voice of a mom shooing a kid back to the fun. But he didn't move. Instead, he leaned against the counter, his damp shoulder brushing the edge of a dish towel I'd left there, and watched me with a steadiness that made my hands falter. "You're always looking out for everyone," he said, softer now, almost like he was testing the words. "Don't you ever get to just breathe? Take a minute for yourself." His question landed like a pebble in still water, sending ripples through me I didn't expect. For a moment I couldn't breathe. His words had caught me off guard, peeling back a layer I'd kept tightly wrapped. I forced a laugh, brushing it off with a shaky, "That's what moms do, right? Keep things running." But even as I turned back to the platter, I felt his gaze linger, a quiet intensity that made my heart skip in a way it hadn't in years. I tried to shake it off as the day wore on. The kids stayed outside, their laughter a constant hum, while I busied myself with refilling pitchers of lemonade and sweeping up crumbs they'd tracked in. But Jake kept finding reasons to drift back inside. Grabbing a napkin, asking where the trash can was, offering to carry something for me. Each time his presence tugged at the edges of my awareness, a thread I couldn't quite cut. I'd catch him watching me from across the room, his expression unreadable but piercing, and I'd turn away, flustered, telling myself it was nothing. A silly fleeting thing. A middle-aged woman noticing a young man's charm. It'd pass, I reasoned, like a summer storm that rumbles and then fades. Yet as the afternoon melted into evening and the sky turned a bruised shade of purple, that flicker in me refused to die. It glowed, faint but persistent, a reminder of something I'd forgotten how to feel. In the weeks that followed, that flicker grew into a quiet tension I couldn't ignore. Jake was around more often. Lily's friends were a constant now, and he was always among them, his laugh cutting through the noise, his shadow crossing my path. Every glance we exchanged felt charged, every casual "Hey, Mrs. Harper" laced with something unspoken. I told myself it was harmless, a crush I'd outgrow, a fleeting infatuation born of boredom or nostalgia. But deep down I recognized it for what it was, a yearning, a hunger for a connection I hadn't felt in years, maybe decades. It was a spark that flickered against the backdrop of my predictable life, threatening to catch and burn. I'd lie awake at night, David's steady breathing beside me, and wonder why Jake's voice echoed in my head, why his words, "Don't you ever get to just breathe?" kept circling back. Guilt gnawed at me, but so did a restless longing, a pull toward something I couldn't name. Then came the night that tipped the scales. Lily had gone out with her crew to catch a movie downtown, leaving the house in a rare, almost eerie stillness. David was at his weekly poker night, the clatter of his keys fading as he'd pulled out of the driveway hours earlier. I was alone, curled on the couch under the soft glow of a floor lamp, a paperback open in my lap but unread. The silence felt thick, pressing against me when the doorbell chimed. It was Jake, standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets, claiming he'd left his jacket behind from the last hangout. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in, more out of reflex than thought. We ended up on the couch, the space between us humming with something alive and unspoken. "Mrs. Harper," he began, his voice low, deliberate, "I've been thinking about you, about how much you give, to Lily, to everyone. Don't you ever wonder what it'd be like to live for yourself? Even just for a little while?" His words broke something open in me, a dam I'd built brick by brick over years of duty and sacrifice. I remembered the woman I'd been before this life, a dreamer who chased sunsets, who believed in love that set her soul ablaze. That woman had faded, lost to the roles of wife and mother, but Jake's gaze seemed to pull her back piece by piece. Emotions swirled, guilt for even entertaining this, longing for what he offered, a bittersweet ache for what I'd let slip away. We talked that night, our voices hushed in the lamplight, sharing fears and fragments of dreams. He told me about his hopes, his quiet struggles, and I found myself confessing things I'd never said aloud, the loneliness beneath my busy days, the parts of me I'd buried. It was a connection that felt fragile yet electric, a thread tying me to a version of myself I'd almost forgotten. When he left, the house settled back into silence, but I was changed. In the days that followed, I moved through my routine like a ghost, caught between the life I'd built and the spark Jake had reignited. I loved David, loved Lily, loved the steadiness of our world, but Jake had seen me, truly seen me, and that shifted something deep inside. Each time he appeared, at the edge of a gathering helping with a chore, I felt it. A silent pull, a question I couldn't answer. I'd catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror and wonder who I was becoming, tears prickling my eyes in the dark while David slept beside me, oblivious. Through the turmoil, a truth emerged: life, with all its flaws, still held magic, still offered chances to feel alive. And though I didn't know where this path led, I knew I'd stumbled into a story of rediscovery, one that demanded courage I wasn't sure I had. That night of whispered confessions on the couch wasn't the end. It was a beginning, a crack in the foundation of the life I'd known. The following week slipped by in a haze of restless normalcy. I moved through my days like a shadow, pouring coffee for David, waving Lily off to her summer job at the coffee shop, tending to the roses that climbed the trellis in our backyard. But beneath the surface something simmered. A restless heat that refused to cool. Lily was out again that next Friday. This time at a concert downtown with her friends. The kind of night where the city lights glowed against the humid Georgia sky and the air buzzed with possibility. David was holed up in the garage, tinkering with an old radio he'd been meaning to fix, the faint crackle of static drifting through the open door. The house felt hollow, its usual chatter replaced by a stillness that pressed against my skin like a weight. Then the doorbell rang. A sharp chime that jolted me from the dishes I'd been scrubbing at the sink. I dried my hands on a faded dish towel, my pulse quickening for no reason I could name, and opened the door to find Jake standing there. He wore a sheepish grin, his dark hair mussed, a faint flush on his cheeks. "Hey, Mrs. Harper," he said, shifting his weight. I tweaked my ankle at soccer practice, didn't feel like chasing the others downtown. "Mind if I hang out for a bit?" His excuse felt flimsy, but concern tugged at me. A mother's instinct mingling with something sharper. Something I didn't want to admit. "Of course," I heard myself say, stepping aside. "Come in. I'll make you some tea, chamomile maybe? It'll help." He nodded, easing into the living room with a slight limp that might have been real or might have been theater, and sank into the armchair by the window, the one with the frayed armrest David always swore he'd replace. The kettle's whistle pierced the quiet as I fussed in the kitchen, the steam curling upward in lazy spirals. I brought him the mug, white with a chipped handle, a relic from Lily's middle school art fair, and sat across from him on the couch, the coffee table a flimsy barrier between us. At first, the talk was small, safe, how the concert might be, whether his ankle would hold up for next week's game. But then it shifted, as it had before, into something deeper, something raw. I don't know how it happened. Maybe it was the way the lamplight softened his features, or the way the silence stretched too long, but I started talking, really talking. Words spilled out like water from a cracked dam. The monotony of my days, the way I'd lost myself in the rhythm of laundry and grocery lists, the loneliness that had settled into my bones despite the full house I called home. Jake listened, his hazel eyes fixed on mine, unwavering, a quiet intensity that made me feel bare and seen all at once. "You're more than this, Mrs. Harper," he said when I'd run out of words, his voice steady, deliberate. "You give everything to everyone else, Lily, your husband, this house. But you deserve to feel alive, to feel something for yourself." His words were a blade, slicing through the numbness I'd worn like armor. They echoed in the stillness, stirring a storm of hope and dread that churned in my chest. Before I could respond, he reached across the table, his hand finding mine. His touch was warm, calloused from hours on the field, and it sent a jolt through me, a current of fear and longing that lit up every nerve. Then he leaned in, closing the distance, and our lips met. It was soft at first, tentative, a question hanging in the air. But then it deepened, a hungry edge to it, as if we'd both been holding our breath for too long. The kiss was a wildfire, searing away the years of quiet resignation, igniting a passion I'd forgotten I could feel. My heart hammered, loud and wild, and for that fleeting moment, the world shrank to just us. The taste of chamomile on his breath, the heat of his hand against my cheek, the dizzying rush of being wanted. But the spell shattered as quickly as it had begun. The rumble of the garage door rattled through the house, Lily, home early from the concert, her laughter spilling in before she did. Panic surged through me, sharp and cold, as Jake pulled back, his face a mask of regret and something unreadable. I leapt to my feet, smoothing my hair with trembling hands, turning away as Lily burst through the door, all chatter and energy. "Mom, you should have seen it. The opener was awful, so we bailed," she called, oblivious to the tension choking the room. I mumbled something vague, avoiding her eyes, my mind a chaos of guilt and exhilaration. Jake slipped out with a quiet night, Mrs. Harper, his voice tight, and I was left standing there, the ghost of his touch burning my skin. The days that followed were a torment of silence and memory. Jake and I didn't speak of it. He'd show up with Lily's crowd, same as always, but there was a new weight in the air, a secret stitched into every glance. Lying beside David that night, his snores a steady rhythm against the storm in my head, I replayed the kiss endlessly, the softness of his lips, the way his fingers had lingered, the promise in his eyes that I could be more than this. It had been decades since I'd felt such desire, such a fierce, consuming ache, and I was torn between terror at what it could unravel and a desperate craving to feel it again. I'd catch myself staring out the kitchen window, hands idle in soapy water, wondering what I'd done, what I wanted. Guilt gnawed at me, David's oblivious trust, Lily's bright innocence, but so did a restless hunger, a need to reclaim the woman I'd buried beneath years of duty. Then fate, or maybe something crueler, pushed me further. It was a muggy Tuesday afternoon, the air thick with the threat of rain. Lily was at a friend's house working on a group project for her summer class, and I'd assumed that meant Jake wouldn't be around. A lifeline I clung to, a chance to steady myself. But the doorbell rang, a sharp interruption to the quiet, and there he was, standing on the porch with a wrench in hand and a faint, nervous smile. Lily said the faucet in the guest bathroom's been leaking, he said, casual but for the flicker in his eyes, something deeper, something that mirrored the churn in my gut. I hesitated, my throat tight, then stepped aside. It's down the hall, I muttered, leading him through the house, each step echoing the tumult inside me. The air between us crackled, charged with everything we hadn't said. In the cramped bathroom, he knelt by the sink, the clink of metal against metal filling the silence. I hovered in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the flex of his shoulders under his shirt, the way his hands moved with a quiet competence. His usual ease was gone, replaced by a solemnity that matched the weight in my chest. When he finished, he stood, wiping his hands on his jeans, and turned to me. "Mrs. Harper, about the other night," he started, his voice low, hesitant. I cut him off, my own words trembling. "It was a mistake, Jake. A moment of weakness. It can't happen again." They felt like a lie even as I said them, a frail shield against the truth pulsing beneath my skin. He stepped closer and I backed up, my shoulders hitting the wall, trapping me in the narrow space. His scent, clean, faintly earthy, filled my senses, overwhelming. "Was it really a mistake?" he whispered, his hand brushing my cheek, tender and deliberate. "Because I can't stop thinking about you, about how it felt." My resolve shattered. I kissed him, hard and desperate, all restraint gone. This time there was no hesitation, just raw, unrestrained passion, a fire that consumed us both. His hands roamed, igniting a heat I hadn't felt in years, a blaze that burned away the wife, the mother, leaving only the woman, alive, wanted, undone. We stumbled against the sink, the mundane tiles a stark contrast to the reckless abandon of our need. When it ended, we sank to the floor, breathless, the weight of it settling over us like a storm cloud. I couldn't look at him, shame creeping in where euphoria had been. "This can't happen again," I whispered, more to myself than him, knowing it was a hollow vow. He didn't answer, just sat there, his silence a mirror to my own turmoil. That night, as David slept beside me, his snores a jarring counterpoint to the chaos within, I lay awake, haunted by Jake's touch, the way his lips had claimed mine, the heat of his hands, the way he'd seen me when I'd forgotten how to see myself. I was caught between two lives. The steady comfort of my marriage, my family, and the intoxicating pull of something new, something that promised to wake me from years of sleepwalking. Each day became a war. Guilt against desire, fear against hope. I'd stand at the sink, staring at the roses through the window, and ask myself, was this betrayal or salvation? Could I risk everything for a chance to feel whole? The memory of Jake lingered, a dangerous thread woven into my quiet house, pulling me toward an edge I couldn't unsee. In that small, ordinary space where routine had once reigned, a dance had begun. Delicate, reckless, inevitable. Every look from Jake, every brush of his presence, pushed me closer to a precipice. I was terrified of the wreckage it could bring. David's hurt, Lily's confusion, the life I'd built crumbling. But I craved it too, that taste of freedom, that rush of being alive. Standing at the crossroads of safety and the unknown, I realized every stolen moment held the power to shatter my world. And though I told myself it was a lapse, a weakness to bury, the truth was undeniable. I'd tasted a life where I could feel again, raw and unbridled, and that taste had changed me forever. And so here I stand, teetering on the edge of a life I've always known and a flame I never expected to feel again. The quiet house around me holds its breath, waiting for a choice I'm not sure I'm brave enough to make. Maybe you've been here too, caught between duty and desire, between the safety of routine and the pull of something wild and uncharted. What would you do? Would you step back into the shadows of the familiar? Or would you chase that spark, no matter where it leads. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below. Have you ever faced a moment where your heart tugged you one way, and your life pulled you another? Share your story with me. Let's unravel these tangled threads together. If this journey resonated with you, hit that like button. It means the world to know I'm not alone in this. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see where this road takes us next. Life's messy, beautiful, and full of unexpected turns. Stick around because I've got more to tell. Until then, take a deep breath. And maybe ask yourself, what's your spark?